Could the Metrodome remain the Vikings' home? And we delve into the daycare union issue in this week's Capitol Report. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Capitol Report. I'm Julie Bartkey. It began with the governor issuing an executive order allowing some daycare providers to vote on whether or not to join a union. That vote was temporarily halted by court order, but the issue is a hotbed of controversy. Even before the governor's executive order, the issue was scrutinized at a joint committee hearing. Dozens of daycare providers filled the room to capacity with arguments presented on each side of the issue.
I am saddened that people think I do this as a hobby. I am saddened that people don't understand what it is I do. When the TV reporter couldn't connect, or the radio interviewer couldn't connect early childhood education with child care, I am saddened that the advocacy that I have been a part of hasn't made a difference in 24 years. And maybe this is why the union can help me.
The union, AFSME and child care providers together, has given me a platform to meet with other licensed family child care providers and to share ideas, questions, and concerns on a local and statewide basis.
I have worked and taught in schools for more than 20 years, but I left a corporate center to open my own business because I wanted to care for children in the way that my education and experience taught me was best. We already have more than adequate regulations to protect children and families in our care, covering every detail about our home, construction, and environment, to the care, activities, and equipment we provide. They are there to protect children and their families. I do not find them overbearing.
Cyndi Cunningham has been operating an in-home daycare for 15 years, helping dozens of children grow under her careful supervision. She considers herself a small business owner and is publicly opposed to joining a union.
With this, the unions are not clear, and it's kind of an open game about what they're going to do. So this whole what is going to happen, what's going to be affected, the parameters on about what they're going to be able to negotiate it are undetermined at this point, and kind of in forever for what they want to do. So for families, I couldn't predict what is going to happen because they won't tell us what might be happening. There are many providers I've heard who have said, you know, if the union comes in and I have to be impacted by the union and the contracts, I'm going to go out of business. I cannot. This is my life. This is my livelihood. This is my profession. I would not be going out of business. I'm not sure exactly what I would be doing. But there are people saying they're going to go out of business for that. So I think it's going to be more limiting. People are saying if taking child care subsidy families, I have to be in the union or fair share dues or any connection with that they therefore would not take families on child care subsidy.
What would you like to see happen as this process moves forward?
I would like to not have it move forward. I would like to see legislation that would protect all small business owners, in particular our business. As contractors and as small business owners, we should not be under this kind of unionization process. The union should be under a process whereby there is labor law and there are rules and there are regulations.
What is in existence working, or is there room for change? And what would you suggest that change be?
I think there's always room for change. I think many of us, including myself, have said, you know, this is somewhat of a wake-up call for us to all look at it, to get more organized, to get more involved with the things that we do have involved are available. I think for the most part it is working. The things that the union is looking at changing are things like CCAP. That's a child care welfare policy. So they're looking to have us back and be participating in changing child care welfare policy. And I do not think that that's what our business should be doing. I think our whole connection throughout our state as far as how we communicate and the things that are available to us need to be better communicated. And I think that our support of the organizations that are in existence that solely have child care focus could be better supported by everybody who wants the union then we would even have a stronger voice with it. But I don't really go for the contractual bargaining unit that needs to be there. All the bargaining ends up being about welfare policies that are not, as a citizen, I don't want a child care providers to be involved with establishing.
A few weeks ago, we sat down with Governor Mark Dayton and asked him a little bit about this issue. Governor, I have a baby in daycare, and when my daycare provider learned of this, she asked me essentially why. So I'm passing that question along to you. Why?
Well, some child care providers want a form of union. They think it'll result in better working conditions, better wages, benefits like health care, which most of them don't have. And there are those who are opposed. And that predated my arrival in the governor's office last January. And this has been going on for several years now. So, you know, there's some people for it and some against it. It seems to me the fairest way and the American way to resolve that is through an election. And so that's what I've authorized, is for an election to be conducted, and then the providers themselves should decide whether or not, and even if it were to be approved by a majority vote, no one would be forced to join the union. No one would be forced to pay dues into the union who's not chooses not to be a member. So it's really, at this point, in my view, one that the providers themselves should be deciding, and not have, you deny an election, you impose that view on the providers, and I think that's a mistake. And I was asked by some to mandate a union, and that would impose that view on the providers. I think that's a mistake. You know, having an election where they decide, to me, is the fairest way to approach it.
Senator Mike Parry opposes the governor's executive order. He sat down earlier with us to discuss the issue and the broader issue of daycare providers voting to join a union. The district court judge recently blocked that pending vote of daycare providers to potentially unionize. So you're in favor of that ruling. Now, in your opinion, what's next?
Well, I think what's next is obviously on January 17th, Judge Lindeman will call his court to order again and hear the case. And you know, we'll be there along with the daycare providers with our, of course, you know, we filed that amicus brief, but we'll be there in their support as well.
The governor's argument thus far has been he wants to authorize an election, and he doesn't understand why there's opposition to an election. Where's the opposition?
Well, I think the biggest opposition right now, Julie, is the fact that we're concerned why an executive order or fiat is needed to discuss the issue, and that's what we're hearing.
And roughly 10 of 14 states did pursue the same issue, though, via executive order. What is it that made you pull back, and the GOP in general pull back and say, we don't want to go this direction?
Well, we just felt that the governor, you know, Senator Hand and I felt that the governor was exceeding his scope of constitutionality, his statutory authority in this executive order. I mean, we're talking about private, individual entrepreneurs here. We're not talking about a company that has employees. These are folks that do the best they can and take care of our children in a daycare setting. They've already met the needs of the requirements through the state, and for the governor to order a vote, and specifically a vote that would affect maybe a third of the total providers in the state of Minnesota, is just wrong.
And Senator, as chair of State Government Innovations and Veterans Committee, a couple of months ago, you held a hearing on this issue. I want to talk about some of the key points that came up in that hearing. Now, one is from Lisa Thompson. She's a child care provider, and she said essentially the challenge for them as daycare providers is more on the regulatory side. Is this a fair argument to try to incorporate some collective bargaining and have a voice at the table, which seemed to be the message that resonated?
Well, I think most importantly, we have to remember that all daycare providers do have a voice. They have representatives, they have senators that do listen to them and take their concerns to Health and Human Services Department, and we speak about that, obviously, through Senator Hand's committee.
If the concern is on regulation and the regulatory side of things, how would you recommend daycare providers then seek out, maybe in a collective manner? Are articulating those concerns?
Well, I think they have an organization right now, and that organization, I think, charges them $35 a year. And comes to the legislature and in essence lobbies for the daycare providers, if you want to call it that. I know there are concerns about there in some of the issues that providers have, but I'm hearing it's more of the enforcement from one county to another that there's a great concern. And I think that has to deal with the knowledge and understanding of any of the laws that we have pertaining to daycare providers.
And let's talk a little bit more about that. What were some of the key messages, in your opinion, that resonated in the hearing? And what would you like to take forward moving into the legislative session?
Well, I think first and foremost, the amount of providers that came forth against this unionization with very, very good reasons. But the inability to, by the union side, to articulate just how this union would come together is concerning to me. It's like trying to do a program without any forethought and organization to it.
In fact, that was also brought up in the hearing. One person stated, essentially, they wanted to know the who's, what's, where's, and why's. All legitimate questions. What will be on the ballot, for example, and why is this even necessary? What's your answer to that? What's your response?
Well, I think I can only go back to what Judge Lindeman questioned and asked the attorneys for the defense. Why not submit this to the legislature? And there was never an answer given. And I think it should be, if the governor wants to move forward, then put a bill together and submit it to the legislature, and let's vet it all over again in the committee process. And that's what the judge said he believes needs to happen.
Okay, my last question for you, we're just about out of time, is Jennifer Mundt, she's a spokesperson for the union, stated, our position is child care providers have already voted. If the governor wants them to vote again, that's fine. We're not afraid of an election. And she stated that organizers have been collecting authorization cards from those who favor unionization since 2005. Are you in favor? Would you support daycare providers voting to unionize if they go about this in a different manner?
Well, I think first and foremost, Julie, they need to go about it in a different manner, because we had testimony in our committee that the unions were coming to them promising things like wage increases, benefits, health insurance, and also saying, well, if you just sign this card, we'll send you information. So the tactics that are being used by the unions are wrong. People get it, they understand it, and they want no part of it. So I think moving forward, it would behoove the unions to be more credible when they're reaching out in a unionization sense.
Okay, Senator Mike Parry, we will track this, of course, as it continues down the judicial process. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
The Vikings Stadium issue heated up at the Capitol. This hearing lasted roughly 6 hours and provided members of the Senate Taxes and State Government Innovation and Veterans Committees an update on potential sites and financing.
We took your counsel, Madam Chair, and we met yesterday with City of Minneapolis, with Mayor Ryback and City Council President Barbara Johnson and staff. And the city walked us through the 3 sites that they had identified and been working on in Minneapolis. We raised a number of questions and issues regarding each site. We did not indicate a preferred site in Minneapolis. I know they're going to speak to you today. They are working to get us answers on the questions that we raised. But I would note that most of the issues that we raised regarding these sites do not exist at the Arden Hills site.
First, our meeting with the Vikings we thought was very productive. We very much appreciate it, and thank you publicly as we thanked you privately for what we thought was a very constructive discussion. We got into some very good details about the many different needs that the Vikings have and that we have. We talked through all sites. They took none off the table, want all to be explored in some way, and we agree with that. We also said that we had been asked to narrow that, and I'll do that in 1 minute, but continue to make progress on that. We talked about financing options and multiple others. It was a first discussion in a while, but I would say a very productive one. Toward the second point of narrowing it to sites, while we do see potential in all 3 and will continue to do those, we spoke with the Vikings at that point and now want to say to you publicly that our preferred site is the Metrodome. We believe that's significant because it does save, according to the numbers that I just heard, about $215 million from the other side on the table. With all the discussion that has taken place in this room about how difficult it is to fund a stadium, we think it is very important to look for a stadium at an option that is proven at a cost of $215 million less for the state of Minnesota. Those are real dollars and it matters.
Here to give the perspective of authorizing a vote for daycare providers to join a union, we have Union Representative Jennifer Mundt. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Jennifer, I want to begin with this issue of allowing daycare providers to unionize. It seems to be a growing trend. 14 states currently in the nation have gone this direction. In your opinion, what are the benefits of joining a union specifically for in-home daycare providers?
Well, family child care providers work alone. They spend countless hours making sure that every child in their care is healthy, learning, and safe. And when the kids finally go home, they face all the challenges of small business owners. So late payments, liability issues, a book of regulations that's about 4 inches thick, and all of those challenges. And they do this while the legislature is meeting in St. Paul, making decisions that affect the work they do and the families they serve. Those providers, because they can't be at the Capitol, would like to have one strong unified voice through a union to address 3 things. Their goal is to improve the quality of child care, to look at improving access for working families who need child care subsidies, and thirdly, to stabilize their profession.
I want to ask you then, we had talked off camera prior to this about trying to articulate those concerns, and in fact, this is probably the first time I've heard those articulated this clearly. How do you get that message out to those daycare providers right now as this issue is going through the judicial process?
Well, there's a big discussion in the public realm. We are focusing our energy on visiting those 2,300 providers who live in AFSME's jurisdiction who will be voting in this election. We go and visit people at home, and they're thrilled to have organizers come to their door and talk with them about ways to improve their profession. People hunger for the opportunity to have 3 things. They want to have peer mentors in their field so that somebody new to childcare can have a voice with somebody who's been at it for a long time to give them tips about things like how to write the contracts between the provider and the parent. They hunger for the opportunity to professionalize their career, to get the training that they need so that they can better prepare kids for school. And they hunger for the opportunity to inform the people who make the decisions about the rules and the regulations that govern their business.
Jennifer, to use your words, you're talking about some who hunger for this information, and as we heard in a hearing a few months ago, there are several who do not opt to join in and actually don't necessarily agree with the vote in general. There are a lot of concerns with this issues and a lot of unknowns, including cost. What's your response to this? Because none of these answers have been forthcoming at this point.
Well, I think there are 2 issues regarding cost. The one is parents pay more, and the other is how much will I as a provider have to pay for union dues? Let's take the first myth, that parents will pay more. That has not been the experience in the 13 states where the governors have recognized unions of child care providers. In fact, what they found is that the child care provider unions have worked with the governor to increase subsidies for working parents. I'll give you an example. In Minnesota, there are 7,000 parents on a wait list for child care subsidies. With that subsidy, those parents would be able to go to work and contribute to the economy. We will advocate for that. It's ultimately the legislature's decision, but we will have a strong voice to advocate for that. The other piece of this is the fear about how much will we pay for union dues. Union dues are not imposed on any union member of AFSME. In fact, there's 3 steps to this process. First, the governor will have an election to determine if there's majority support for the union. If there is majority support, if the providers say, yes, we want to join together with a stronger voice through a union, then the governor will recognize that union and direct his commissioners to work in an advisory capacity with the Child Care Providers Union. And then the providers will come together and decide what do they want to accomplish, how much is that going to cost, and can they afford their dues. The bottom line is the providers set their agenda and they decide how much they can pay. So I'll give you an example. If the providers were to decide that they couldn't obtain health insurance on their own and that they wanted to come together as a pool and see if they could get affordable health insurance, then that would raise the cost of the dues if health insurance was part of it. So it's too early to say when there are so many unknowns, and the bottom line is the providers set their agenda, they decide what their dues are going to be.
What about providers who choose to not be a part of a union if this does go to a vote and if it is approved, can those daycare providers opt out?
Here's the deal. Membership is voluntary and dues payment is voluntary. And you can be assured that dues will be affordable for providers because they're the ones who decide the amount.
Okay, and finally, a district court judge, as we know, recently blocked the pending vote of daycare providers to potentially unionize. Now, you oppose this ruling, so what's next?
Well, what the ruling did is it delayed the ballots going out. They were to have gone out this week. They will now be held until after January 16th when there's a court hearing. The judge did not make a ruling on the merits of Governor Dayton working with child care providers to better prepare kids for school. And the public policy grounding on this is very simple. Half of the kids in Minnesota are not prepared for school. Many of them are living in poverty with poor nutrition. The more that the state can help providers do a good job of feeding and helping these kids learn, the more prepared our kids will be for school. And if you look to Art Rolnick at the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, he says we can't afford to not invest in early education and early care. The reason for that is every dollar invested gets you a $12 return. We've got a child care provider who is in business with his wife. He used to be a correctional officer at Stillwater Prison. And what he will tell you is that it's easier to build strong kids than it is to repair broken men.
Last question, because we're just about out of time, but as I hear you tying this issue in with early childhood education, the question I would have then is, would there be a set curriculum that these daycare providers would have to adhere to fall under an early childhood title?
I don't think this is about heavy-handed regulation from the state in terms of saying thou shalt teach this. However, there are resources that providers hunger for to help them choose what curriculum they're going to teach so that kids are ready, so that they know how to count and do their alphabet before they hit kindergarten. There are also resources that we can provide about how to provide kids with good nutrition. Kids who are able to eat fresh fruits and vegetables are healthier and they're better prepared to learn. The problem is, last legislative session, the legislature cut the subsidies for child care. That meant that they cut the pay for child care providers by 2.5%. That makes it more and more difficult for the providers to afford the curriculum and the nutrition that kids need to be prepared for school.
Jennifer Mundt, on those words, unfortunately we're out of time, but thank you for coming in and clarifying your position. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Minnesota cattle are tuberculosis-free. That proclamation was given by Governor Mark Dayton, and a certificate was presented to a bipartisan group of lawmakers who helped craft and pass legislation that is credited with saving a billion-dollar industry.
800,000 cattle were tested for TB. I'll say that again. 800,000 animals were tested for TB during this time. In addition to that, 14,000 deer were sampled for TB by DNR up in that area. And finally, and I think the most difficult part of it, was 58 cattlemen sacrificed their herds for this cause. So 58 people had to give up their raising cattle for at least a period of time. And I want to talk to you just briefly about one of those people. The first herd we found, he had a large, about 500 cow beef cattle herd. It was a purebred herd, Black Angus and Tarentaise, and he had been developing this herd for about 30 years. And it was a very difficult thing for him to be told that he had TB and he had to depopulate his herd. So on the day the trucks came to pick up all of his animals and take them to a processing plant, he rode out on his horse into the pasture with his cattle, and tears were flowing down his cheeks. It was very emotional for me, what these cattle mean to people.
It's a demonstration of what good government can be, because you could not have done this without the state government taking the lead and providing the resources and the expertise to get Minnesota back to bovine TB free.
We told our colleagues here at the legislature, we need your help. We've got to take this devastating tragedy that's facing us head on. We got to put aside any differences, metro, rural, partisan politics. We've got to put it aside and save a billion-dollar industry here in the state of Minnesota. Because we can't have a livestock industry in trouble and have a strong agriculture. We can't have a strong state without a strong agriculture. It's such a big part of our state. So we did, and a lot of people are to be commended and to take credit, especially Dr. Bill Hartman putting together the program to salvage this. And we can talk a lot about it, but probably the best comment I can make about the efforts we made is the other states are copying it. Other states that are facing the same tragedy that we faced in the last several years are looking at Minnesota, the effort that we did, and looking at it as the way to handle this problem.
Put yourself in their shoes. I don't care if you have 3 cows or 1,000 cows. You know how that cow reacts, every single one of them. You know their traits. You know you raised them. You had them bred. You mothered them to having this calf. You ride on your horse. You ride on your four-wheeler. You drive through them with your pickup every single day, including Sundays and snowstorms. And you, all of a sudden, the next day they're all gone. And just imagine what that's like. These guys who sacrificed their herds up there went through that, and I can't imagine. I didn't have to experience that myself, but I can't imagine walking out my front door in the morning and not seeing my herd of cattle out there.
That concludes this week's Capitol Report. From all of us at Senate Media Services, I'm Julie Bartkey. Thank you for watching.